Hi guys, today I'm very excited to challenge myself by trying to take something scary and make it cute using polymer clay. Pretty recently, a horror game came out called QUARRY with some creepy monsters in it that I thought would be perfect to start out with. So spoilers ahead if you somehow haven't looked into this game yet. Now, the monsters in this game turn out to be werewolves, but they definitely aren't the typical werewolves you'd think of. And because of this, I really felt like I needed to start out with a sketch to try and get down some key features. These werewolves are more humanoid. The features that really stuck out to me were the pointed ears, the sharp teeth and claws, the amber eyes, and the red color of their body. There was actually a scene that inspired me the most to create this, where one of the characters runs into a werewolf on an island, and the werewolf's tongue was just dangling and hanging out of its face, and it was super spooky. So for my werewolf, I wanted to add that tongue sticking out too. With any sculpture, I like to start off with tinfoil to block out the general shape. I create a round shape for the head and cover that in some rolled out clay. Using my hands, I smooth the clay out, but I found that I needed to add some clay to the chin area because my head shape turned out to be too much of a circle. So I just pushed some more clay on the bottom and used my fingers and a bit of clay softener to get a nice blend. Then I moved on to pressing out where the eyes would be. I knew that I wanted them to be big, so I took the biggest dotting tool I had and pushed into the clay, making two big holes. I did need to smooth out some of the edges, that way it wasn't too indented, but once I got it how I liked it, I added in the eyes. For the eyes themselves, I just smushed in two rolled up pieces of clay, but once they were in, I didn't feel like the shape was right, and I wanted it to be more like how it was in my sketch. So I went back in with some more clay and added some to the top outside corner of each eye. I felt like in order for my clay version to come out just as cute as the sketch, I had to try and make it as close as possible to the actual sketch. Moving on to the mouth, I take a smaller clay dotting tool and press out the basic shape. I had to make sure it was big enough and deep enough to fit the teeth that I was planning on adding in later, but this did make it look kind of weird and goofy without anything in it at all. Taking a silicone shaper tool, I smoothed out all the rough edges and the ridges and bumps on the inside of the mouth as well. Next up was the nose. Now, if I'm honest, it was pretty hard to get a good look at these werewolves' noses. The game is pretty dark and they're constantly moving, so I couldn't find a really still image with that much detail. But in my opinion, it did look like they had a bit more of a longer, almost muzzle-like nose, while still being pretty human-like. So I took some creative freedom here and went with more of an animalistic nose. Now that most of the face features were done, I decided to work on the teeth. For the teeth, I knew I wanted them to bake separately. That way they could harden and I could push them into the soft clay without them losing their shape. So I take a few small pieces of clay and roll them between my fingers, pinching one end to get that taper, and I use the exact same method for the claws. While they baked in the oven, I began on the body of my werewolf. I start off very similar to the head, where I take some rolled up tinfoil and cover it in clay, then smooth it out. For the legs, I didn't use any foil since they were much smaller, and rolled out these two squished cylinder shapes. They were super easy to attach to the body and were the most simple part of the whole creature. The arms are also like the legs, where I rolled out cylinder shapes, but quickly learned they didn't attach to the body the way I wanted them to. They would stick out too far and just not sit right, so I needed to shave some of the clay off. To do this, I use an X-Acto blade and create an edge, but please don't do what I do and cut towards your finger like I am. I easily could have cut myself, and I'm lucky that I didn't, so make sure to be careful when using these types of tools. Once all the limbs were attached, I now wanted to attach the head. To do this, I used some armature wire, but I did need some extra clay where the neck would be, if you had one, to make sure that the wire was sturdy. Then all I do is push the wire into the body and push the head right on top. Alright, so back to the teeth. Oh boy, did they test my patience. I tried with tweezers at first since they're so small. Turns out, I'm not very good at working with tweezers. So after a few failed attempts, I decided I was better off with my hands. At least I thought I was. A couple drops later, I finally got the tooth to stick to the mouth. And then I just had to go and mess with it. After that failure, I had a change of plans. New strategy was to add some more clay to the mouth, almost like gums, because who would have thought that gums would help hold teeth in? And thankfully, this actually worked. I was able to get the top teeth in with the help of the little clay blobs that I added, and I just smoothed those into the rest of the clay with my shaper tool. The bottom teeth were so much easier, thanks to gravity, and I just added an outside, gum line to make sure these were held in as well. I also pressed in the claws, which gave me no issues at all since I had so much clay to work with down by the stubby arms, and I went with 3 claws on each hand. After that whole ordeal, I threw the start of my werewolf into the oven for its first official bake. That way, I didn't lose any of the progress that I just made. Once it was out of the oven, it was time to move on to the ears. I took some clay and sort of measured it up by the head so I could see the size and placement. I knew these were going to be pretty important because they were one of the key features I was talking about earlier. I then rolled out this clay and shaped it into an ear with a little pointy tip, but it did take me a few tries to be happy with them. When I added a small amount of bacon bond to the back of them and stuck them onto the sides of the head. That way I knew they wouldn't slide off of the hardened clay in the oven. And then it was time for the last sculpting detail, the one that really got me thinking about the whole project in the first place, which was the werewolf's tongue. To make the tongue, I roll up a small amount of clay between my fingers and then press it out in a long triangle shape. And then it went straight into the little gap I had left between the bottom teeth. And then back into the oven it went for the final bake. So now that all the sculpting was done, it's time for the painting, and I think this will really bring it all together. I start off with some primer, which really gives the acrylic paint a nice surface to lay on, and it helps the colors stand out. I do about 3 coats of primer, and then I mix up a really nice burgundy for the body. I used mostly red, but also added some brown and a small amount of blue. The first few layers of this color looked great and were exactly what I was going for, but as it dried and as I layered it up more and more, I started to see a change. By the time I finished a few coats, the color dried to this deep chocolate brown. The red that I had started with was almost lost, and it just wasn't going to work. The reason the werewolves in the game were that burgundy red is because, well, to put it simply, when the people transform into the werewolves, they basically explode into the form, meaning lots of blood and lots of red. In order to bring that red back, I add what's called a wash. I water down just straight up red paint, no brown or blue mixed in this time, and I paint it all over the brown. This gives an even coat of red to start covering up that deep brown, and with a few more coats of that wash, I get it back to what I originally thought the color would be. Next up was the detail work, and I wanted to start on the eyes, but I knew this burgundy was going to be too dark for the amber color to show up well. To save myself from having to do a million layers of yellow, I went back over the eyes with a couple layers of white, just so I had a nice base to start on again. Then I go in with a bright golden yellow with the smallest amount of orange mixed in, which really contrasted the burgundy of the skin. I then switch to the mouth while the layers of yellow dry on the eyes and paint black behind the teeth. Then, of course, I used a teeny tiny detail brush to throw on some white for the teeth themselves. I use black for the pupils, making sure to go slowly and carefully. That way I can try and match what I had in the sketch as closely as possible. I always feel like the bigger the pupil is, the cuter it turns out. And last, but definitely not least, I add the white highlight. And with that, my werewolf inspired by the ones in the QUARRY is complete. I feel like it turned out so close to how I wanted it to, and if you see the werewolves in the game, I feel like you definitely can tell that this is inspired by them. I think I was successful in creating something cute out of something creepy, and this has really motivated me to try and make something cute out of other horror characters. Let me know if that's something you'd like to see, and feel free to leave suggestions down below. Also, feel free to like and subscribe, and I can't wait to bring you more cute creations.